All right, let's dive into a story that's happening right now. It's flying largely under the radar, but you know what? It could totally reshape the economic future for over 1 billion people. We're talking about how Africa is literally rewiring its own financial system from the ground up. So let's start with a really simple question, one that gets right to the heart of the problem. If you're running a business in one African country, why is it so ridiculously expensive and slow to pay a supplier in the country, like right next door? It seems like that should be easy, right? Well, as it turns out, it's anything but. And that simple question, it leads to this, a pretty staggering reality. According to the UN, doing business between African countries costs 50% more than the global average. Yeah, 50%. That's not a typo. That is a massive financial wall that has been holding back trade on the continent for decades. The system just wasn't built for neighbors to trade with each other. To really get what a number like that means in the real world, we've got to zoom in. We need to go from these big abstract stats to a personal story. So let's look at the dilemma for just one trader who's trying to grow her business. So this is Amina. She runs a small but really ambitious textile business out of Kigali in Rwanda. She gets these beautiful fabrics from Ghana and sells her final products to customers in Kenya and Tanzania. Now, for entrepreneurs like her, who are the absolute backbone of so many African economies, every single one of those cross-border payments used to be a complete nightmare. So just look at the absurd journey her money had to take. To pay her supplier in Ghana, Amina's Rwandan francs didn't just hop across the continent. Oh no. First, they had to travel all the way to what's called a correspondent bank. Think of it as a middleman in New York or London. There, her francs were swapped for US dollars, and of course a fee was taken. Then, those dollars were sent back across the Atlantic to Ghana, where they were swapped again, this time into Ghanaian cedis, with another fee. This whole mess could take 3 to 5 days. It was just incredibly slow, inefficient, and super expensive. And all those little fees and delays, they add up to what economists call transaction costs. It's not just one charge. It's like death by 1,000 cuts from currency conversions, bank fees, and just the risk that the exchange rate will change while your money is in limbo. For a small business owner like Amina, this could eat up 15, even 20% of her profit margins. And that's not a small thing. That's the difference between just surviving and actually growing your business.
But what if you could just bypass that whole long, expensive detour? I mean, what if you could build a direct financial freeway connecting African economies? Well, that is exactly what is happening right now.
And it's called PAPSS, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. It might sound like a boring piece of financial infrastructure, but its goal is totally revolutionary, to make payments between African countries as simple, as fast, and as cheap as paying your neighbor. Okay, now let's look at Amina's life with PAPSS. She goes to her local bank in Rwanda and sends the payment in Rwandan francs. Almost instantly, her supplier over in Ghana gets the full amount, and it's already in Ghanaian cedis. That's it. 2 steps. The money never leaves Africa. The whole thing is settled in real time. And this really illustrates the difference perfectly. The old way was this massive, totally unnecessary detour around the world. The new system, it's a straight line. It's a direct connection. This is all about efficiency, speed, and this is the crucial part, keeping value inside the continent. So let's talk about the bottom line, the cost. Remember those transaction costs that could gobble up 15 to 20% of profits? Well, with PAPSS, they drop to under 3%. That is a complete game changer. For millions of businesses just like Amina's, this isn't just a small savings, it's a fundamental shift in how intra-African trade even works. And hey, this isn't just some idea on a PowerPoint slide. It's really happening. Central banks all across the continent, we're talking heavyweights like Nigeria, plus Ghana, Zambia, Liberia, you name it, they're all connecting to the PAPSS network. And having the big players on board is what gives this system its real power and its reach. Now, what's so fascinating about this is that this super modern, tech-driven solution, it's actually the fulfillment of a dream that's more than 60 years old. Yeah, the vision of a truly integrated Africa, one that trades and collaborates seamlessly, that didn't start with a fintech app. It started way back in the early 1960s, as a whole generation of new leaders was figuring out the best way to secure the continent's future after colonialism. So in those early days, 2 main schools of thought popped up. On one side, you had the Casablanca Group with guys like Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah.
They were the big dreamers, arguing for an immediate political union, a true Africa without borders. But on the other side, you had the Monrovia Group, who were more pragmatic. They argued for a more gradual, step-by-step approach that focused on economic cooperation first, while respecting national borders. In the end, the gradual approach won out, and it was all laid out in the 1991 Abuja Treaty. This treaty was basically the long-term roadmap to create a full African economic community. You can see the stages here. It was a long game, starting with strengthening regional groups and slowly moving toward a common market. And a system like PAPSS? Well, it's the critical financial plumbing you need to make that common market actually work. So, okay, solving an African problem with an African solution sounds pretty straightforward. But when you start building new financial pipes, you inevitably run into the geopolitical plumbing that already runs the entire world. And that brings us to the US dollar. For more than 75 years, the US dollar has been the world's go-to currency. Most international trade, whether it's oil or coffee, is priced and paid for in dollars. And this isn't just for convenience. It gives the United States immense economic and political power. When you control the financial rails, you can use that control as a weapon through things like sanctions. And you don't have to take my word for how seriously that power is guarded. This quote from Donald Trump makes it crystal clear. He directly compared losing the dollar's top spot to losing a major world war. Those are his words, and they really show you just how high the stakes are in Washington. And this isn't just talk. This post from late 2024 laid out a very explicit threat. Any country involved in creating an alternative to the dollar could face 100% tariffs. That's not really a negotiation. It's an economic ultimatum. So this brings up the big question. Is PAPSS a direct challenge to the dollar? Well, it's nuanced. First, and this is key, PAPSS is not a new currency. It's a payment system, the rails. It's not trying to replace the dollar for trade with, say, China or Europe. It just makes the dollar optional for trade within Africa. It's being presented as a solution to a specific African problem, those high transaction costs, not as some attack on America. And really, it's just one piece of a much bigger global trend of countries building their own financial infrastructure. This is a quiet financial revolution, one that's being built not with big speeches, but with software code and banking agreements. So where does all this lead? What happens next? Okay, so the crucial takeaway is this. PAPSS is about way more than just lowering fees for businesses like Amina's. It's about building the fundamental infrastructure, those financial pipes we talked about, that you absolutely need for something like the African Continental Free Trade Area to truly work. It's a practical, powerful step toward a more economically integrated and self-reliant continent. And that leaves us with a final, kind of provocative thought. As Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world build their own payment rails and start experimenting with settling trade in their own currencies, you have to ask, are we witnessing the beginning of the end for an era that was defined by a single dominant global currency? Look, the world isn't ditching the dollar overnight, but it is building options. And in finance, just like in life, having options, well, it changes everything.